Aspect is a grammatical category that expresses how an action, event or state, denoted by a verb, relates to the flow of time. A basic aspectual distinction is that between perfective and imperfective aspects. Perfective aspect is used in referring to an event conceived as bounded and unitary, without reference to any flow of time during. Imperfective aspect is used for situations conceived as existing continuously or repetitively as time flows. Further distinctions can be made, for example, to distinguish states and ongoing actions from repetitive actions. Certain aspectual distinctions express a relation in time between the event and the time of reference. This is the case with the perfect aspect, which indicates that an event occurred prior to the time of reference. I have eaten, I had eaten, I will have eaten. Different languages make different grammatical aspectual distinctions, some do not make any. The marking of aspect is often conflated with the marking of tense and mood. Aspectual distinctions may be restricted to certain tenses. In Latin and the Romance languages, for example, the perfective and perfective distinction is marked in the past tense by the division between imperfects and preterites. Explicit consideration of aspect as a category first arose out of study of the Slavic languages. Here verbs often occur in the language in pairs, with two related verbs being used respectively for imperfective and perfective meanings. Basic concept. History. The Indian linguist Yaska dealt with grammatical aspect, distinguishing actions that are processes from those where the action is considered as a completed whole. This is the key distinction between the imperfective and perfective. Yaska also applied this distinction to a verb versus an action nominal. Grammarians of the Greek and Latin languages also showed an interest in aspect, but the idea did not enter into the modern Western grammatical tradition until the 19th century via the study of the grammar of the Slavic languages. The earliest use of the term recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary dates from 1853. Modern usage aspect is often confused with the closely related concept of tense, because they both convey information about time. While tense relates the time of reference to some other time, commonly the speech event, aspect conveys other temporal information, such as duration, completion, or frequency, as it relates to the time of action. Thus tense refers to temporally when, while aspect refers to temporally how. Aspect can be said to describe the texture of the time in which a situation occurs, such as a single point of time, a continuous range of time, a sequence of discrete points in time, etc., whereas tense indicates its location in time. For example, consider the following sentences. I eat, I am eating, I have eaten, and I have been eating. All are in the present tense, as they describe the present situation. Yet each conveys different information or points of view as to how the action pertains to the present. As such, they differ in aspect. Grammatical aspect is a formal property of a language, distinguished through overt inflection, derivational affixes, or independent words that serve as grammatically required markers of those aspects. For example, the Quechua language spoken in Guatemala has the inflectional prefixes k and x to mark incompletive and completive aspect. Mandarin Chinese has the aspect markers la, zhe, zai, and guo to mark the perfective, durative, stative, durative, progressive, and experiential aspects, and also marks aspect with adverbs, and English marks the continuous aspect with the verb to be coupled with present participle, and the perfect with the verb to have coupled with past participle. Even languages that do not mark aspect morphologically or through auxiliary verbs, however, can convey such distinctions by the use of adverbs or other syntactic constructions. Grammatical aspect is distinguished from lexical aspect or accensart, which is an inherent feature of verbs or verb phrases and is determined by the nature of the situation that the verb describes. Common aspectual distinctions. The most fundamental aspectual distinction, represented in many languages, is between perfective aspect and imperfective aspect. This is the basic aspectual distinction in the Slavic languages. It semantically corresponds to the distinction between the morphological forms known respectively as the aorist and imperfect in Greek, the preterite and imperfect in Spanish, the simple past and imperfect in French, and the perfect and imperfect in Latin. Essentially, the perfective aspect looks at an event as a complete action, while the imperfective aspect views an event as the process of unfolding or a repeated or habitual event. For events of short durations in the past, the distinction often coincides with the distinction in the English language between the simple past xed, as compared to the progressive was, xing, and I was writing letters this morning. In describing longer time periods, English needs context to maintain the distinction between the habitual and perfective, although the construct used to marks both habitual aspect and past tense and can be used if the aspectual distinction otherwise is not clear. Sometimes, English has a lexical distinction where other languages may use the distinction in grammatical aspect. For example, the English verbs to know and to find out correspond to the imperfect and perfect of the French verb savoir and the Spanish equivalent saber aspect versus tense. The Germanic languages combine the concept of aspect with the concept of tense. Although English largely separates tense and aspect formally, its aspects do not correspond very closely to the distinction of perfective versus imperfective that is found in most languages with aspect. Furthermore, the separation of tense and aspect in English is not maintained rigidly. One instance of this is the alternation, in some forms of English, between sentences such as, "Have you eaten yet?" and "Did you eat yet?" Another is in the pluperfect, which sometimes represents the combination of past tense and perfect, but sometimes simply represents a past action that is anterior to another past action. Like tense, aspect is a way that verbs represent time. However, rather than locating an event or state in time, the way tense does, aspect describes the internal temporal constituency of a situation. Or in other words, aspect is a way of conceiving the flow of the process itself. English aspectual distinctions in the past tense include I went, I used to go, I was going, I had gone. In the present tense, I lose, I am losing, I have lost, I have been losing, I am going to lose, and with the future modal, I will see, I will be seeing, I will have seen, I am going to see. What distinguishes these aspects within each tense is not when the event occurs, but how the time in which it occurs is viewed, as complete, ongoing, consequential, planned, etc. In most dialects of ancient Greek, aspect is indicated uniquely by verbal morphology. For example, the very frequently used aorist, though a functional preterite in the indicative mood, conveys historic or immediate aspect in the subjunctive and optative. The perfect in all moods is used as an aspectual marker, conveying the sense of a resultant state. E.g., rho alpha omega ic, epsilon delta omicron nu I saw, omicron delta alpha I am in a state of having seen equals I know. Many Sino-Tibetan languages, like Mandarin, lack grammatical tense but are rich in aspect. Lexical versus grammatical aspect. There is a distinction between grammatical aspect, as described here, and lexical aspect. Lexical aspect is an inherent property of a verb or verb complement phrase, and is not marked formally. The distinctions made as part of lexical aspect are different from those of grammatical aspect. Typical distinctions are between states, activities, accomplishments, achievements, and punctual, or semelfactive, events. These distinctions are often relevant syntactically. For example, states and activities, but not usually achievements, can be used in English with a prepositional for phrase describing a time duration. I had a car for 5 hours, I shopped for 5 hours, but not, I bought a car for 5 hours. Lexical aspect is sometimes called Aktionsart, especially by German and Slavic linguists. Lexical or situation aspect is marked in Athabascan languages. One of the factors in situation aspect is telicity. Telicity might be considered a kind of lexical aspect, except that it is typically not a property of a verb in isolation, but rather a property of an entire verb phrase. Achievements, accomplishments and some Imperfectives have telic situation aspect, while states and activities have atelic situation aspect. The other factor in situation aspect is duration, which is also a property of a verb phrase. Accomplishments, states, and activities have duration, while achievements and some Imperfectives do not, indicating aspect. In some languages, aspect and time are very clearly separated, making them much more distinct to their speakers. There are a number of languages that mark aspect much more saliently than time. Prominent in this category are Chinese and American Sign Language, which both differentiate many aspects but rely exclusively on optional time indicating terms to pinpoint an action with respect to time. In other language groups, for example in most modern Indo-European languages, aspect has become almost entirely conflated in the verbal morphological system with time. In Russian, aspect is more salient than tense in narrative. Russian, like other Slavic languages, uses different lexical entries for the different aspects, whereas other languages mark them morphologically, and still others with auxiliaries. In literary Arabic the verb has two aspect tenses, perfective and imperfective. There is some disagreement among grammarians whether to view the distinction as a distinction in aspect, or tense, or both. The past verb denotes an event completed in the past, but it says nothing about the relation of this past event to present status. For example, wasala, he arrived, indicates that arrival occurred in the past without saying anything about the present status of the arriver. Maybe he stuck around, maybe he turned around and left, etc. Nor about the aspect of the past event except insofar as completeness can be considered aspectual. This past verb is clearly similar if not identical to the Greek aorist, which is considered a tense but is more of an aspect marker. In the Arabic, aorist aspect is the logical consequence of past tense. By contrast, the verb of similarity, so called because of its resemblance to the active participial noun, is considered to denote an event in the present or future without committing to a specific aspect or sense beyond the incompleteness implied by the tense. Those are the only two tenses in Arabic, at least that's the way the tradition sees it. To explicitly mark aspect, Arabic uses a variety of lexical and syntactic devices. Contemporary Arabic dialects are another matter. One major change from Al-Fushar is the use of a prefix particle to explicitly mark progressive, continuous, or habitual aspect. By Yiktib, he is now writing, writes all the time, etc. Aspect can mark the stage of an action. The prospective aspect is a combination of tense and aspect that indicates the action is in preparation to take place. The inceptive aspect identifies the beginning stage of an action, and inchoative and ingressive aspects identify a change of state or the start of an action. Aspects of stage continue through progressive, pausative, resumptive, cessive, and terminative. Important qualifications. Although the perfective is often thought of as representing a momentary action, this is not strictly correct. It can equally well be used for an action that took time, as long as it is conceived of as a unit, with a clearly defined start and end, such as, last summer I visited France. Grammatical aspect represents a formal distinction encoded in the grammar of a language. Although languages that are described as having imperfective and perfective aspects agree in most cases in their use of these aspects, they may not agree in every situation. For example, some languages have additional grammatical aspects. Spanish and Ancient Greek, for example, have a perfect, which refers to a state resulting from a previous action. This corresponds to the have said construction in English, as in, I have recently eaten. Languages that lack this aspect often use the past perfective to render the present perfect. In some languages, the formal representation of aspect is optional, and can be omitted when the aspect is clear from context or does not need to be emphasized. This is the case, for example, in Mandarin Chinese, with the perfective suffix le and the imperfective zhe. For some verbs in some languages, the difference between perfective and imperfective conveys an additional meaning difference. In such cases, the two aspects are typically translated using separate verbs in English. In Greek, for example, the imperfective sometimes adds the notion of try to do something, hence, the same verb, in the imperfective and aorist, respectively, is used to convey look and see, search and find, listen and hear, versus eta kappa omicron upsilon sigma alpha mu epsilon nu. Spanish has similar pairs for certain verbs, such as sabia versus super, podia versus pude, queria versus quiz, and no queria versus no quiz. Such differences are often highly language-specific.